Hello, gamers! Welcome to the 5th episode of the Foundry VTT 101 course. In this video, we're going to be inviting players to join us in the game, and we're finally going to get to combat, and we're also going to be talking about how to loot after combat is done. The only thing your players need to join your Foundry game is a web browser. They don't have to buy any licenses or install any Foundry software at all. To invite players to your game, select the Game Settings button on the right, and at the bottom, click the Invitation Links. This dialog has two options. Because I'm hosting on my own network, I'm given the local network address here, which is fine because I'm going to be joining from the same computer that I'm running my Foundry instance on. But if I was inviting players to join who were outside of my own home, I'd need to use the internet address down here. You'll see a red X here because I haven't set up the port forwarding that we talked about in the very first video. Note that if you're using the cloud or preferred hosting options, this dialog will look similar, but it will be pre-populated with the information related to the server that you've paid to host on. When I click the address, Foundry automatically copies the value. And I've opened up a web browser window here. I'll just go ahead and paste that address into my web browser window and hit enter. I'm now connected to the game. You can see that the player view is very similar to the GM view when it comes to the join window. I'll go ahead and from this drop down, I'll choose test player. Note that the game master here is already taken because I'm using it in my other window. Quick reminder that although I'm not using any passwords for the purposes of this tutorial, you'll always want to use passwords for at least the GM. I'd highly recommend using them for everyone in the game. I'll go ahead and click Join Game Session. And right away, we can see that there's an issue. First off, we can see that the entire scene background is black. My player cannot see a thing. The reason for this is that I deliberately set up my model map in the previous video to use token vision. If I switch back to my GM view and navigate to Scenes, and I go to the Village of Glenfinnan and click on Configure, I can click the lighting, and I can see that yes, Token Vision checkbox is selected. But the problem is that Test Player doesn't have any tokens yet. It'd be like somebody sitting down at the real world gaming table, and then the GM asks them to roll something on their character sheet, but they don't even have a character sheet yet, so they have no idea what to roll. So let's go ahead and fix this. I'm going to go ahead and click Actors on the right, and I will go to Quill and right click, and then I'll select Configure Ownership. You can see here that we've got a setting for all the players and for just my test player who is joining. If I click on this drop down, we can see that we have 5 settings in the test player. Default means that the setting from the all players drop down up above takes precedence. None means that my test player can't do anything because he doesn't own anything yet, which is why we see the black screen. Limited means that a player can view some of their character sheet, but not all, and they cannot edit the character sheet or their token at all. Observer means that a player can view everything, but they still can't edit their character sheet or their token. Owner means that a player can both view and edit pretty much everything for their character sheet and for their token. And this is what we want for my player. So I'll select the owner setting. Before we leave this dialog, I want to point out something that may not be very intuitive. Let's say that we have multiple players in the game, a group of 3 with you as the GM. If you were to leave the All Players drop-down as it is, it means that players cannot view or edit each other's character sheets and tokens. It would be a real-life equivalent of sitting at the gaming table next to another player, but they couldn't peek at either of their neighbor's character sheets. If you modify this to be limited, it means that players can view some things on their neighbor's character sheets, but not edit those character sheets and tokens. And so on and so forth down the line with observer and owner, just like we saw for the test player setting. I'd suggest asking your players how much visibility and control they want other players to have with their character sheets in the game. With some games, characters want to see what's on each other's sheets. Other games, it's a very private thing. So, this all player setting is very important to speak with to your players before starting. I'll go ahead and save changes, and then I will go back to my player view. And now we can see that I can see my scene in the background. I'm going to go ahead and close this dialog because I don't need to make any changes to colors, etc. Now, something to note here during this video, which is different than all the others, I'm going to be juggling between two different Foundry VTT windows at the same time, one for the GM, another for the player. And this could get a bit disorienting to you, the viewer, because I'm trying to fit 2 points of view into one small viewing space. Please be aware that when you are running the game or when you are joining a Foundry game, now this will be a lot easier because you'll only be doing one of these things at a time. Let's take a moment here and compare and contrast the player and the GM view. On the player view at the top of the screen, I can only see one breadcrumb. I do not see the Mystic Wagon or the test scene. I can see that G Game Master and T Test Player are currently located on this same scene. Off to the left on the layer controls, I can see that as a player, I have a very limited set of these controls as compared to the GM. At the lower left, there's a list of all players currently connected to the game, both the GM and myself. At the bottom center, I have my macros, which are still empty. And on the right, I have the exact same sidebar buttons as the GM. However, these are much more limited. For instance, if I click the Actors button, I only see my token. And the reason for that is because that's the only token that the GM has given me privileges to see. I don't see Manny the Merchant or the Shadow or anything else. Going down the line, everything here is mostly empty. You'll see items, journals, rollable tables, card stacks. I do have a player hand that I have set up ahead of time. Nothing in macros. My playlists are empty. There is that playlist that I had with the music box is not here. I can see some compendiums, and I do see the same thing that the GM sees here. And when we get down to game settings, I have a very limited set of things that I can do. For instance, I do not have the ability to invite others to the game. Before we get to killing things and taking their stuff, I want to talk more about privileges and ownership in Foundry VTT. If we look at the map in the background, we notice that we cannot select or double click anything associated with Manny the Merchant. In fact, we can't even see that he is Manny the Merchant. We can fix that by switching over to the GM window and right clicking on Manny and selecting the Open Configuration or Gear button. Here on the Identity tab, I can change the token name to Manny the Merchant, and then I'll select the drop down for display name and switch it to hovered by anyone. This means that any player in the game or the GM can go ahead and hover above this token and they will see Manny the Merchant displayed. Finally, I'll change the token disposition here at the bottom, which by default is set to hostile. I will go ahead and change that to friendly. Now, this setting isn't really necessary, but it just makes me happy. When I click Update Token, I go back to our player view. And now, as the player, I can see when I hover above Manny, I can see his name. I can also see that what used to be a red square for hostile is now blue for friendly. Again, the color change isn't really necessary, it just makes me happy. I'm going to go ahead and return to the GM view and make some changes to all of the tokens on the board that have these attributes where applicable. I'll go down here to Lug, right click, token settings. Let's go ahead and make sure that his name is Lug. It is always displayed when hovered by anyone, and we'll go ahead and make him neutral. Again, we hear our tavern music because I've clicked on Lug. While we're down here, our bartender will also be friendly. Save. And let's see, who's next? Our shadow? Don't think he's going to be friendly. I'll make sure that when I go into his identity settings, I never want his name displayed, and I do not want his disposition displayed. I don't want anything giving away what he is. Finally, let's go ahead and get Quill set up. I'll display him as Quill. If we had other players, they'd be able to see his name. And he is not hostile, he's me, so he's friendly. Then I'll go ahead and return to our player view and zoom out just a bit. Have you noticed anything about the signposts in this scene? If I go over here to the left and click on journal notes, I can see that my notes display is clicked as on because it has the purple/blue background, yet I cannot see the signpost in front of our tavern. Why is that? Well, it has to do yet again with permissions. So I'll go back to the GM view to fix this. The map note for our tavern, the Horseshoe Road Inn, is very different than the other two because that map note is attached to a journal entry. And when we created our journal in a previous video, we didn't modify any ownership settings at all, so they all belong to the GM and not to anyone else. Let's go ahead and change that now. I'll go ahead and click on the Journal button on the right and open my Village of Glenfinnan journal. Recall that we have two entries here. The top one is for me, the GM. The bottom one is for both the players and me as the GM. I'm going to go ahead and right-click the Horseshoe Road Inn journal. This is actually a page in the journal, and select its Configure Ownership option. This dialog should look very familiar because it's pretty much the same one we used when giving our player access to their character sheet and their token earlier in this video. These two controls, all players, test player, work exactly the same way as the other ones we just saw. For this page of the journal, I do want all of my players to be able to view, but I do not want them to be able to edit. So I go ahead and select Observer from the drop-down. Because default is selected in the bottom drop-down, every player, including test player and all the others who might join, will inherit this observer privilege. This means that I don't need to go ahead and assign each player the observer access one by one. I'll go ahead and click Save and close my journal. And then I will go back to the player view. And now our hanging signpost outside of the tavern is visible. Moreover, when I double left click on the signpost, I now see the journal entry that we modified the permissions for. Note that I cannot see the journal entry for the village because those privileges still only belong to the GM. Likewise, I cannot see any of the two secret entries down here. I'll go back to the GM view, open up that journal again, move to the Horseshoe Road Inn page, and click on the top secret entry to reveal it. to show you what it looks like for the player. Back in the player view, and we can see this entry now. Returning to the GM view, I can hide that entry again. And back to the player view, and it is gone again. This is really great for when you only want to reveal details if players successfully pass a test or a roll. Now, I know we've spent a whole bunch of time on journals already, but I'd like to show you just a few more things that you can do now that we have an actual player joining the game. Going back to the GM view, you might want to consider creating a journal for each player to keep track of their own personal notes during the game. I'm not sure about your group, but one of my gaming groups was notorious for not remembering what the heck they did during the previous game. So a personal or group journal can really help with this. To set one up, it's the same exact steps we did in our previous video. We click Create Entry, and we'll call this Player Journal. And we create the journal entry. And I'll go ahead and put just a basic page in here titled Game Notes. Create that. I don't really have to put anything in there, but I'll go ahead and do it as a sample. We'll do Hello World. Save it. And now I will go back and assign permissions and privileges to this player journal. We're going to go ahead and configure ownership. And for all players, we will go ahead and make them the owner and save our changes. When I go ahead and return to the player view and click on the journals entry, I can now see that there is a player journal waiting for me. I can open it. I can edit this journal. Super duper. Save. And now, if I return to the GM view, we can see that super duper has been added. In addition, players can go ahead and add pages as they see fit. They can also choose from all the different types of pages. Save, close, and now there are two different pages here. Back to the GM view, two pages here. So you can see how this would be very valuable if you have a group of players. You can assign them each their own page. It's just really handy to have everything in one place. One last thing about journals before we go fight Lug, and I'm going to switch back to my GM view for this. I'm going to go ahead and go back to the village journal. And I'm going to go ahead and create a new page in my village journal. This particular page I'll call test image, and I'm going to choose the type as image and create the page. I wanted to show you the difference between image pages and what you could do with those as opposed to just text pages, although this same type of thing is possible. I'm going to go ahead and select an image. Once again, I'll make it larger so I can see. I'm just going to choose this giant hole in the ground here, select it, and save my entry. Now, I go over here to test image. I can see that. Something interesting that you can do with an image page that you cannot directly do with a text page is you can right-click on the entry and show players. A dialog appears asking me which player I would like to show the image to. Again, there's only there's only one player here, so it doesn't really matter. But if you had a team of, say, 3 players, you could actually choose which checkbox you wanted to show and which ones you did not. Leaving all the default here, I will go ahead and show players. It says my image is shown to selected players. Now when I go to my player view, I can see that this image pops up directly on the screen. This feature is super handy for when you need to show character portraits or images to one or more players, or maybe there's a secret image you only want to show to one player. We'll go ahead and close this, back to the GM view, and close all my other windows. As we make our way to the tavern to pick a fight with Lug, I'd like to point out something that may not be obvious. And we're back here in our player view, and all we see here is solid black shadows for our fog of war. But if we switch back to our GM view, we can see both gray and black. So what's going on here? Well, it turns out Foundry keeps track of what the GM sees with each token independently of what each player sees with each token. And it does that by default. So for instance, as the GM, I have moved all over the place with Quill, so it remembers in gray what I had seen before. However, my player has actually just joined and they are just using Quill, and they have not moved Quill anywhere, so he has not seen anything from his token point of view. Again, Foundry does all of this by default. You don't need to do anything special. I'm here in the player view, and I'm going to go ahead and move toward the inn. I'll go ahead and click and drag. First, I need to select token controls. Click and drag. And here we are at the inn. I'm going to go ahead and open up the door. The music will play. And I can see inside the inn now. So the first thing I'm going to do before doing anything else is I'm going to lower my volume. In this case, it's the environment tab. So I'll move that a little bit lower. Likewise, on my GM view, these are all independent, but since I'm playing it through the same computer, there's no change. You'll hear it now. Okay, much lower. So you and your players may have to adjust those independently so that you don't blast each other's ears off. So Quill enters the inn and comes here and sits down at a table. Manny walks over, takes his order, and Lug wanders over and starts a fight. Now, there are multiple ways to select tokens for combat. I'll switch over to my GM view and zoom in on our inn, just like I've done with player view. So one of the ways that you can select tokens for combat is to left drag and select all the tokens you want to engage in combat. The other way you can do it, if we release these, is to left click and hold down the shift key and manually select as many or as few tokens as you want in combat. Regardless of which way you select, the next step is to pick any of the combatants and right click and toggle the combat state with the crossed swords in the lower right hand corner. When I go ahead and click this, it looks like nothing has actually happened. But if we go over here on the right hand side to combat encounters, you can see that both Lug and Quill have been added to the encounter. However, nothing has been started yet. I have the option to manually roll either Lug's or Quill's initiatives. There's also a button at the upper left, which allows me to roll everyone's initiative for them all at once. And there's another button next to it that just allows me to roll for all NPCs, but not player characters all at once. When I switch to player view and select those same combat encounters, you can see that I have the same basic setup, but it looks like only my initiative die is available to roll. Back to the GM view, and I will roll for just lug. Something to note here, up until now, in these videos, everything has pretty much been system agnostic, which is to say that a journal is just a journal, regardless of whether you're playing D&D 5e or Call of Cthulhu or Fallout 2D20. Ditto with maps and tokens and music, everything else here. But from this point on, during combat, things become very specific to the game you're running. For D&D 5e, our initiative dialog shows that we have multiple options with respect to how we roll. For simplicity, I'm just going to go ahead and click normal here. Lug rolls a 12. We can see it up here on the right, and we can briefly see it in the chat messages indicator here to the left. Now I'll switch over to my player view and roll for Quill. Once again, presented with the same dialogue, I'll just choose normal for simplicity. Quill rolls very low. He rolls a 3, and so now we can see the lineup. Back on the GM view, I'll go ahead and click the Begin Encounter button on the bottom right. A very, very large animated D20 die has appeared underneath Lug because he is first with a 12. It is signaling that it is his turn. As we move between all the combatants, the giant die will move to different combatants. I'm going to go ahead and say that for his move, Lug is just going to basically grab Quill and threaten him. This is twofold. My script goes with Quill fighting first, so that's what I'm going to adhere to. And also, Lug is drunk, so he's going to do something dumb like that. What I'll do is click on next turn. When I click the button, you can see that the giant 20-sided rotating die moves to Quill, and Lug's turn is over, and Quill is now up in the initiative. I'll go ahead back to the player view, and I'm going to go ahead and target Lug so that Foundry can do all of the combat calculations for me. Now, there are multiple ways for players to target in Foundry VTT. In the upper left corner of the screen, there is a bullseye button. Click once, and you have activated the bullseye or the targeting system. If you click once on your opponent, you can see that the target reticle is forming around Lug. If you click again, left click again, it goes away. It is a toggle. I'll deselect the targeting button up here in the left before showing another method to target. A second way for players to target is to double right click. You can see here, double tap, it disappears. Double tap, it targets again. And remove again. The final way for players to select a target is to hover their mouse above the target and press T on the keyboard. And once again, this is a toggle, so I can go back and forth. If I switch over to the GM view, here's what it looks like when someone has targeted something. We can see that there's a small yellow dot above Lug, and that dot means he's targeted. The yellow matches the color of the player who's targeting him. In this case, test player has sort of a yellow greenish highlight color, and that is the color of the dot. Something to note here. Don't confuse the dot that is fixed above Lug with the yellow dot that is dynamic and moves around when a player moves their mouse. So I'll go ahead and switch back to player view here. And I will move the mouse to the upper left of the tavern here, almost by the sign. And coming back to the GM view, you can see there's a yellow dot that shows where my player's mouse is currently at. I find that the moving dot feature can be handy to see where my players are looking or what they're interacting with. But if the moving flying cursor dots are too distracting when, say, you have 3 or 4 or 5 players, they can easily be turned off in the game settings. Okay, back to player view. I'm going to go ahead and open Quill's character sheet and see if I can attack Lug with a sword. I'll double left click on Quill's token, and I will click the picture of the short sword. Now, the D&D 5e system is going to ask me a whole bunch of stuff in this dialogue. For simplicity, I'm just going to click the normal attack button. For just a moment, in the background here, I can see what he's rolled. He's actually rolled quite well at the chat window in the bottom of the screen. However, that disappears pretty quickly. So I'm going to go ahead and click on the chat messages button on the right. Now I can see through the history here that I have gone ahead and rolled an attack in this chat dialogue. As always, if I want to know more about what dice were rolled, I can click on this expander and it will show me my base roll plus any bonuses. Now, with the D&D 5e system, there's no indication of whether a player has hit his or her target. To find that out, we have to switch to the GM's view. Just as it was in the player view, I can't see any of the rolls unless I switch to the chat messages. As a GM in the D&D 5e system, Foundry tells me that yes, Quill did hit Lug. We can see it here represented in the green color. If he would have missed, it would have been in red. Now, every one of these chat windows is different depending on which system you're using. However, for D&D 5e, this particular chat dialogue shows that I have rolled to hit. It shows that I am trying to hit Lug. It shows that Lug only has a 12 armor class, and clearly I got above that 12 armor class. So that is the attack portion here. The damage portion is a button below. So there's actually two chat dialogues in D&D 5e that you use at a single time to coordinate attack. First one is the attack, second one is the actual damage. When it comes time to apply the damage from the short sword, I need to make sure that I'm looking at the player view because the player is the one who has targeted Lug. And so when I roll the damage for the short sword, it will apply it directly to Lug. Clicking on the button, you can see we're presented with another dialogue, and I'm just going to go ahead and click normal. So Quill rolls a 5 for his damage. You can see here that although I know how much Quill has rolled, he does not have the ability to apply that to Lug. For that, we go back to the GM side, and we can see that the GM has a slightly different representation here. So we see that the short sword did roll 5 damage. If we want, we can expand and see how that works. But the important part is down here. We can see that the player has targeted Lug. If we go ahead and apply the damage, 5 hit points will be removed from Lug. But the GM also has some additional selections here that allow him or her to modify that damage roll. In this case, there's no need to do that, so I will go ahead and apply. And we can see that 5 points have been removed from Lug. We can see this either by right-clicking, we can see that his hit points are lower, or we can double left-click and see that he is 6 out of 11 hit points. When Quill's turn is over, there are 2 ways to advance to Lug's turn. But before we go ahead and get to that, there's already a problem. In order to see the combat encounter, I need to re-click that button on the right. But now, if I do that, I lose the chat window that shows the combat and the damage history. And this is just not an efficient system. So we're going to make use of a Foundry VTT feature that allows us to display multiple tabs at once. I'm going to go ahead and right-click on the chat messages button. You can see that the chat dialog has popped out, and I'm free to move it pretty much anywhere on the screen. This right-click feature works for any of our buttons on the right. So let's get back to this fight. I can advance the turn to lug by clicking on the right arrow at the bottom of the combat dialog like we did before, or I can go ahead and switch back to the player view, and we will go ahead and right-click here. In this case, we'll do the combat encounters, so that will pop out. Now we can see our combat tracker is here. It takes up a lot less real estate if we do that instead of the chat dialog. I can go ahead and advance my turn as a player by clicking on the End Turn button. Now it's Lug's turn again. We can see the giant die appears underneath him. I'll switch to the GM view, and I'm going to go ahead and target Quill now. Now that Lug has been hit, he's no more Mr. Nice Guy. GM targeting is just a bit different than player targeting. They can still use the bullseye in the upper left-hand corner. You can see it click on and click off. And they can still, if I remove this here, they can still go ahead and hover and press the T. See, that's on and that is off. But they cannot double right-click the target, as that has a different function we can see here for GMs. They can single right-click and choose the bullseye in the menu that pops up, however. That is the toggle target state. Same targeting reticles show up, and if we switch to player view, our test player can now see that whoever has the pink, purple, fuchsia dot, in this case the GM, is targeting them. Let's go back to the GM view. The same that I did with the player on our other screen, I will double left click to open Lug's character sheet, and he will go ahead and swing with his scimitar. I'll scooch this over so we can see. Same dialog pops up as before. I'll go ahead and click the normal button for the attack roll. Just as before, regardless of whether I hit or miss, the D&D 5e system in Foundry will not show the player whether an attack has hit or missed. So here in the GM view, I can see, yes, I have hit. Quill's armor class is a 13. I rolled a 15. That's above, so I see green here. If I switch to the player view, we can see that Lug has attacked. You can see the details of his attack, but we cannot see if he hit or not because we are the player, and the D&D 5e system does not show that to the player. As with their other turn, to apply damage on an attack that hits, I click that particular damage button in the chat window. We see this other dialog pop up that popped up before. Go ahead and click normal. All the same things are here. I can see what damage there was, very little. I can see that Lug is targeting Quill. We'll hit for 3 damage if I don't apply any modifiers. I'll go ahead and hit apply. Now, we can't see much here because everything is behind all these windows. But over here in this window, if we double left click on Quill, we can see he is 13 out of 16 hit points. Likewise, the player is able to right-click on their own token. It will not work on a token they do not own, but on their own token, they can see their hit points down there as well. We can see that on the GM screen. There's a real problem here. There's just so much stuff on the screen that I actually can't even see the background. There are a couple different ways that we can tidy this up. First, I'm going to go ahead and close this chat log, and then I'll do what I did for Quill, the player character. I will go ahead and right-click the combat tracker or encounter tracker, which is a much smaller window, and then switch back to the chat messages. Now I've freed up some more screen real estate, so that's helpful. I can also go ahead and close Lug's character sheet after I'm done with him, but then I just need to open it up again each round, which is kind of a pain as well. One possible option would be to minimize the sheet. The way that you minimize the sheet in Foundry is to double left click, and you can see it kind of rolls up to a very mobile, very small type of, I guess, placeholder. And we could double click again, double left click again to expand. So you can expand and contract to minimize. The issue with this is I still need to double left click to open or close that particular window. And what I really want is a solution whereby I don't have to open the sheet at all. This is where our macro bar at the bottom center comes in handy. I can actually go ahead and open this character sheet and left click and drag the scimitar down into any of the macro slots. So there it is in number 1. And I can do the exact same with the light crossbow, number 2. Now I can go ahead and close the character sheet completely. Some things to note here: the ability to drag and drop items from the character sheet to the macro bar is independent of Dungeons & Dragons 5e. It'll work for any item in any character sheet or any compendium in any system in Foundry. While dropping weapons or spells or items into the macro bar works great for one token, such as Lug, it does not work very well if you have lots of tokens. For instance, if you had a battle with 20 different goblins, it would be very difficult to keep track of those, even though we have quite a few of these slots. It'd be very difficult to keep track of which goblin had which sword. Now, there are modules which help with this sort of thing, but for now, that's beyond the scope of this video. Let's go ahead and advance the turn to Quill. And we're going to go ahead and switch to the player view. To copy what we did for the GM view, I'm going to open Quill's character sheet and drag his attacks down into the macro bar as well. And then I'll go ahead and close his sheet. Now, Lug is still targeted from the last turn, so I really only need to choose a weapon to hit him with. I'll go ahead and choose my trusty short sword. I go ahead and click here, and notice in the chat window, it is already preparing me for the attack. I'll select normal just as I did the last time. In this case, I roll an 8. As the player, I have no idea if that will hit or not, so we will go back to the GM screen. In this case, as the GM, we can see that an 8 was not enough to beat Lug's 12 armor class. Then, just as before, we would go ahead and advance to the next turn. We would be at round 3 this time. Lug would be up. He could go ahead and click his scimitar. He could go ahead and roll his damage and see if he hits. He also misses. And so you could kind of see here, that's pretty much D&D 5e combat in a nutshell. The fight would basically ping pong or tennis match back and forth until either someone ran away, or someone was unconscious, or someone was dead. I'm going to go ahead and end the encounter by pressing on the End Encounter button. And I'll also go ahead and confirm. Now, before we leave combat completely, I'm going to highlight a few other things about how Foundry handles it. Throughout this fight between Lug and Quill, Foundry pretty much took care of everything for us. It added and subtracted everything as needed, so long as either the player or the GM targeted their opponent first. But suppose we're working with a system like Fallout 2D20, where there is no targeting built into the system. You can actually go ahead and select or target someone, but the system itself is not built to automatically deduct damage. In that case, you could either open up the character sheet and manually adjust health or HP or whatever the measurement is in that game system, or you could go ahead and right click the token and manually adjust the HP, which is listed underneath the token here. Let's say that I wanted to move lug down to a 1. I could either go ahead and type in -5, and Foundry will go ahead and do the math for me, or I could go ahead and select an exact number, like 2, and it will go ahead and set it automatically. Now, with fully automated systems like D&D 5e, we also get conditions for free. Don't know if you saw it, but when I dropped Lug's hit points below half, the D&D 5e system decided that his condition was bloodied. It automatically gave him a status effect shown here in the upper left-hand corner of his token. And if we open his character sheet, we can go to the Effects tab, and we can see that he is temporarily bloodied. If I manually go ahead and set his HP above half, we can see that the condition automatically goes away. But let's suppose we have a game system which is not as robust as D&D 5e, and we need to set the conditions manually. In that case, we can go ahead and right-click, like we did here, get the menus to pop up, and then go over to Assign Status Effects. If we left-click this button, you can see that there are a variety of different conditions here. Some of them default to every game system, some of them very specific to D&D 5e. So for instance, if he was prone, we would list him as prone. We can also set multiple conditions. So if he is sleeping, he automatically falls prone because when you're asleep, you fall to the ground. We can also revert those conditions by left-clicking again, removing sleeping, removing prone. Now here's some more combat stuff that we can do. Suppose we get Lug and Quill back into combat again. Highlight, right-click, toggle combat. I'll take care of all the initiatives. This time Quill is first. I'll begin the encounter. I'll go ahead and advance a couple of rounds. Maybe we're on round 3 now. What happens if we want to add our bartender into the fray? We only need to go ahead and right-click his token the same way that we did the other two, and select the Combat State button in the lower right-hand corner to automatically add him to the lineup. You can see now he's here. He's at the bottom because he has not rolled his initiative yet, but we can go ahead and roll that initiative and see where he winds up. Normal. In this case, he's last, so it will leave him at the bottom. If he rolled, say, a 16, it would have put him in between Quill and Lug. So if you have a situation with, say, waves of combatants, or a situation where liquid courage kicks in after a few rounds, you can easily expand your encounter by right-clicking and selecting Toggle Combat State. Now, our combat here for this example was pretty basic. Essentially, it's just 2 tokens whacking the heck out of each other with swords. But the one thing we didn't cover in our combat was magic. Depending on the system you're playing in Foundry, you may not even have magic available, but for D&D 5e, there is lots of it. I'm going to switch to open a compendium, and I'd like to give Benny the Barkeep a spell. Let's go over here and see if we can find a good spell for our bartender. I'll go over here to Modern Content, Spells. I'm going to go ahead and search for Sleep. Okay, so that looks good. And then I'll come over here to Benny's character sheet. And I'll go ahead and drag sleep onto here and just drop. And once again, you'll only see it if you're on the particular tab of that sheet. So over here with spells, we can see that I have gone ahead and dropped sleep into his character sheet. I'll go ahead and close my spell compendium. Now, Benny is a real wizard when it comes to mead and ale, but he is certainly not a magic user. Using the D&D 5 system, I'll go ahead and make this spell into a scroll, because if I try to cast this, it'll tell me, hey, Benny's not a magic user, because it's smart enough to do that. I'll go to this small kebab menu, which is the 3 vertical dots on the right, and I will go ahead and create a scroll. This is one of the features of the D&D 5e system. In this case, everything looks great. I hit create scroll. I'll switch over to the items tab or inventory tab to see that that scroll is here. I'll go ahead and move that scroll into my macro bar. Say number 6. And I'll close Benny's character sheet so I can clear up some more room and see what I'm doing. I'll go ahead and cast sleep. I can either click on this or press the number 6 on the keyboard. Let's see, I'd like to see my chat window, so let's do that. I go ahead and press this. Okay, and then it is asking me, would you like to use it? And also, does it disappear after you use it? It asks me where I like to place a template. These are all great. I'll go ahead and use this ability. Couple of different things happen here when I click that. First off, on the right-hand side of the screen, you can see I have just a very large description of everything that's going on here. All of these links, I can go ahead and click them and open up a compendium. It has a bunch of different buttons here. It tells me a whole bunch of things about the spell, what it requires. But the most important thing here is that the nature of a sleep spell in D&D 5e is that it requires a point of origin. And you can see I'm dragging around a purple, pink, fuchsia kind of point of origin thing that tells me that I have a 5-foot sort of a reach with this. So we're going to go ahead and use this crosshair to put a template underneath both Lug and Quill, because really at this point Benny is just tired of them fighting in his bar, so he's going to try to put them to sleep. I go ahead and left click. This actually makes kind of a plus crosshairs here, like so. If I go ahead and end the encounter, I'll do that so that we can see where this plus is. Now we can see that this plus crosshair affects everyone in all 5 of the squares, of which Quill and Lug are present in both, but Benny is not in there, which is good because we don't want to put himself to sleep. Now I'll go back to this chat window and let's see. Everything is listed for me. I have placed the measured template. It did that automatically. I can see who this affects, but again, this is not targeting these two. It is only meant to show where the spell could potentially land. So according to Sleep, if I'm centering here, both of these guys are targeted. I'll make sure that as the GM, I am targeting both of these tokens because they're both going to be affected. Like so. I've got 2 of the target reticles there. And I'll click on, the DC 10 Wisdom saving throw. And this should have both Quill and Lug roll for their saving throw. What it's telling me here is I do not have tokens selected, so even though they are targeted, I will go ahead and select them. Like so. And now we can see that both of them are selected. Actually, Quill is selected. Let me see if I can get Lug selected. Shift. There we go. Now both of them are selected. Now I will go ahead and have both of them make a DC 10 Wisdom saving throw. There we go. This one is going to be for Quill. I'll just, out of these three options, I'll select normal. And then the same thing for Lug, normal. So Quill failed his check. Lug did not. Just like before, when we had to actually go ahead and select the tokens, I'll go ahead and remove the targeting here because that may give you an idea that is not true. The tokens merely need to be selected. At this point, if I want to go ahead and actually put people to sleep, I need to manually select Quill, and I need to deselect Lug. So I will go ahead and click only on Quill. There we go. We can see over here in the chat menu, only Quill will be sleeping for 60 seconds. And this double arrow that says apply to selected tokens, I'll go ahead and click on it because Quill failed that roll. And now Quill is automatically sleeping. So that is an example of how spells would work specifically in the D&D 5e system. We can see that this particular chat dialogue is a lot more complex than just the dialogue we had for basically hitting each other with a blunt object. So each individual game system is going to have unique information in the chat window, and it'll just depend on who developed that. But either way, that is a thorough overview of how combat would work for the D&D 5e system, both melee combat and spells. I'm going to clean up the battle map a little bit here by removing that pink crosshair or purple or fuchsia crosshair. To do that, I go to measurement controls on the left. We can see here that now this is selectable. I will click that once and then click delete on my keyboard and it is gone. Likewise, I also could have hit this clear templates down here in the trash can and it would have done the same thing. However, that does it for the entire map. So if I had had 5 of those crosshairs, this trash can would have taken care of all of them. If I manually select them by left clicking, I can custom choose which of those 5 I want to delete. So that's combat. And what's left for us to do after combat? Looting. That's what. Now there are multiple ways to handle looting for your players in Foundry, and these solutions are independent of whether you're running D&D 5e or not. The first way is to have you, the GM, manually give players their stuff. So if I open up Lug's character sheet by clicking on token controls, double left clicking, I'll move it off to the left here so I have enough room. Double click on Quill, move his off to the right. If I click the inventory tabs for both players, both characters, then I can see the inventory for each. I can actually drag and drop items from one sheet to another. So supposing that Quill wants to grab the scimitar off of Lug, I can go ahead and drag here and drop, and you can see that it has moved from one character sheet to the other, and it has also removed it from the source sheet and added it to the destination sheet. The flaw in doing it this way is that if there are lots of NPCs or lots of players or both, then you're going to need to open up a lot of character sheets. In our example with 20 goblins, you would have to do this possibly 20 times for multiple players. It would just be a lot of work. The next way to do this is to have players grab their own loot. You as the GM would open a character sheet of each of the NPCs who were defeated in the combat. You'd go to whatever section of the character sheet had the equipment or inventory, and then you'd tell your players what they can loot. On Lug, there is a light crossbow. Lug also has leather armor. Then, switching to the player view, Each player would individually go to the Compendium packs, look up the right content, go to Equipment, and then search for it. So here's a light crossbow. The player would then open their character sheet, and they would grab the light crossbow and put it in their inventory. The flaw in doing it this way is that it is 100% on the honor system, and that can be good or bad depending on your players. We're going to completely fix this looting issue in our next video by using a module, but for now, these are the built-in ways to loot in Foundry VTT. While we're on the topic of the honor system, you may be wondering if allowing your players to access every single compendium is a good idea or not. Now, maybe test player can absolutely be trusted not to take the Vorpal sword, but if you trust your players around weapons, do you really trust them to be able to look at the stats for Lug and the Shadow and your other NPCs? Maybe that's something that you don't want them to see. If not, you can always go to the GM view here. I'll close these character sheets and go over to Compendiums. Now we're looking at the same D&D modern content here. You can always right-click on a specific folder within the compendium and select Configure Ownership. So for instance, let's suppose that we did not want players to see actors, which contains all of our stuff like our shadow. Remember, we grabbed them from here. Okay, we do not want them to see those. So we would like to hide the actors portion of the compendium from the players. Go ahead and right-click, configure ownership. And just like with our actors and our journals, this dialog allows us to limit visibility to our players all at once. So I'll select none for my player visibility, and then I'll click configure ownership. You can see that a tiny eyeball has been added to the actors portion of the compendium, indicating that only certain individuals can see it. And when we switch back over to the player view, we can see that even though the actors portion is still there, if we try to click on it, it will tell us you do not have sufficient permission to view it. So even though it is still there, they cannot see it. Whereas equipment, if we click on it, again, we can still see that one. We can see spells, all that type of stuff. Congratulations! You've just completed the 5th video in this series. Thanks for watching, and I hope you have one hell of a good day.